Welcome to this video on the Zenwar channel. My name is Shri Satguru, Buddha Rawa Bhagwan. Today's video on the channel, we're going to talk about power. Beings of power. Where that power comes from. So when we talk about people that have magical power, supreme power, special powers, white magic, black magic, the ones who really have power, where does it come from? And the answer is that there are different sources where the power can come from. But at their origin, all the powers find their origin in a divinity. And at their origin, all beings of power find their origin in their Adi Shri. So Adi Shri, the first Shri of the Adi Shri who created the great lineages and trees of descent. This is where the powers come from the Adi Shri. In different cultures, different traditions, programmed in different ways, developed in different ways, with their own Adish, their own Adi Shri. And this is something that was known at one point. Different cultures had their different versions of fruits or vegetables or professions or different abilities that could be used and acquired, that gave power in the system, different specific abilities and different specific powers. These were the treasures of the cultures, the true power of the culture, to change time and space, to change the story, to reprogram things, whether this be the weather, or the earth, the sky, the minds of human beings, the hearts of human beings, or other things. And if you see this is a form of technology, like we have the ability to reprogram our physical world around us with physical technology, we also have the ability to change the very structure of the story, the very development of the story with mystical technology, which connects to physical technology. In this way, like when you have, for example, a machine, a complex machine with a motor, sometimes when you have to fix the machine, you have to fix the moving parts on the outside and on the cage or on the structure. And sometimes you have to go into the motor. Life is complex. Very complex. And the structure is not always the same as the engine. But both work together and both are connected, as they are part of the same whole. Power comes from the Adi Shri at one level or another. And other beings under an Adi Shri's development tree are empowered, even some of them, to sponsor others for power. And depending on the culture and the area of the world, it falls on a different Adi Shri. And in that way, the foodstuffs, the cultures, the stories, the empowerments of those cultures are different. The treasures of the culture, the spiritual treasures that can be gifted through line of descent, succession, parampara, or its equivalent. Or the distribution process of that culture, which can vary in different ways depending on the culture. In this way, power comes to those who are gifted power through the power chain of an Adi Shri. There are those that get that power through a specific bloodline, where the power is moving through a bloodline and a story related to a bloodline. There are those that get that power through events in their life taking place. And there are stories that take place from the soul that they have and the being that they are. So there are different ways and reasons why a being might be gifted power in the story, including because they deserve it, and they have shown that they deserve it. So as power can be gifted in this system by an Adi Shri treasure chain, it can also be removed once that treasure is removed from the daily access of that practitioner. As it's not because you gain something from an Adi Shri tree that you're going to keep it necessarily. Power comes in many different forms. There are many different types of power, different types of professions, of fruits, of vegetables, of naga eggs, many different types of power. And some are particularly treasured and particularly sought out by others. In a way, powers have been developed by the respective Adi Shris so that they could be better utilized to develop the development stories under those Adi Shri to further move the agenda of the Vishnu, of the becoming all-pervading, of cracking the reality, the system, with the Kala Chakra. And this purpose has been achieved. So now there has been a reintegration of the Adi Shri with an achieved purpose. And now, after the reintegration wave, many of the stories were hit by the wave. And their place and priority moving into the future might not be assured. This includes stories of gods, of saints, of beings of different types. Because if you're not re-included after the reintegration wave has reassessed and redetermined, then you might be at risk of being forgotten. And with being forgotten, losing the power that grants you your place and prestige as a story. So there are many different types of power. Many different types. And power can be acquired in different ways. There are different practices that those do to gain power. For it is said that if you do certain practices, you will gain power in time. Such as mantra, for example. There are some that practice and practice sincerely, and there are some that practice and do not practice sincerely. There are those that are destined to become powerful, and there are those who are not destined to become powerful. But there are some beings called beings of power that have acquired power in different ways, in different storylines. They may have a lot of power, or they may have less power. There are beings such as enlightened beings, which are the most powerful. And amongst enlightened beings, there are some that are more powerful. All things are relative, of course, but not really. There are just some that are more powerful. With power comes an understanding of the world and creation, an enhanced understanding. In the same way, with an enhanced understanding comes power. For example, look at the physical world. An enhanced understanding of physics and science comes power, right? Of healthcare, we allow us to cure diseases, for example, that are of the medical type, right? An enhanced ability, antibiotics, treat infection. With an enhanced understanding comes power. But for beings of power, they get an extra level of extra understanding. There are different types of power. There's physical power, wealth, money. This is real power in our world. There is the power over someone's life. This is real power. There is the power to take everything from someone. This is power. There is the power to help someone. This is power. There is the power to show someone love. This is power. So many different types of power. Some people can do magic. Magic is a real thing. Different types of magic. There is sorcery magic, witchcraft. There is divine magic, such as the magic of the gods or the magic of God himself. And beings of power can sometimes use different types of magic according to how powerful they are as a being of power, depending on what they feel like doing or how they feel like using power. There is the power in sound, the power of chakras and activating chakras. There is the power of siddhi, which comes from an Adi Shri development tree, siddhi power. Right? There is the power from the menu of professions, fruits and vegetables. There are many different types of power chains. And this is the way they are seen, as power chains. They originate at one place, one being of power, which has been gifted the ability to grant power to other beings by the Adi Shri, or they originate from the Adi Shri. himself or herself. For there are also female Adi Shri. Beings of power exist at different levels. Some of them have had a view of you. This is where the power, the real power, comes from. Once a being has had a view, one of the great views of power, then they acquire the understanding of that view of power, which grants them the ability to use power in that context of that view. As you may know, the Vishnu avatar, the Kalki avatar, is the one who has seen all the views, who has created all the views. The all-pervading one within all the stories, all the views. The preserver of the story. The operator. The one who descends. And these views of power exist in different ways. There are the views of Santa Muerte. There are different views. There are the views of the Mahavidya domains. There are different views. There are Siva views. There are different views. And if you realize all the beings of power get an extra understanding of reality, and this comes from a view. They are known as Vidya, so the Mahavidya, the great views of the goddess. They are known as the Vedim, the Septa Vedim, and the other Vedim, so the views, the great views of God. They are known in many different ways. They are known also as the Vu, as the Mayan Vu, the views of Maya, the Mayan pantheon, the Mayan story of history and time, the eternal story of Maya. So the Mahavu, the great view. And then there are the different views of the different storylines. The storyline of men, the storyline of spirits, the storyline of gods, the storyline of demons, and the storyline of ancestors and true death, which are all different Vu from the Mayan Vu. And these Vu, these visions, grant power as they grant connection, the ability to connect in the technology of the Vu. So when we talk about a saint that has had a vision of the goddess, for example, it is a form of Vu, a form of vision, a form of darshan. Okay, a form of seeing. And when we talk about the prophets, we talk about those who have three types: the ones who hear, the ones who see, and the ones who understand what they see and hear. The third level. But the prophets, for example, very known prophets, could see in their mind's eye visions given to them by God. The Vu, understanding, or vision. And then there is also the ability to comprehend, but through hearing. So not understanding, but to acquire the knowledge. For it to come in Then there is the knowledge that is seen, and then there is all the knowledge that is understood properly. And that is the third level of prophet. So the different visions of things that are not normally seen in everyday life, that which is hidden, those visions that come through grace, not through your own accomplishment. However, it is your own accomplishment which has led you to a place where you have received grace. The Sri Vishnu is the all-pervading one who has seen everything. Vishnu, Vinu, full sight of everything, who has all the vu, all the stories, who is all-pervading within all of them, and preserves them all. So the vu, the views of power, the great views in different cultures and traditions, give knowledge and power, as they give understanding of connection technologies, as well as payload delivery technologies, defensive technologies, and other types of technologies such as creative and transformative technologies, and preserving technologies within the system that can be used by beings that have power. So beings that have more power than lifting with their hand, they can do things in different ways that don't seem logical or connected to someone who's watching through normal means. So as there are beings of different types that have different types of power, there is also magic and witchcraft that also exists, as there is the divine power of the gods, which is the divine power of the Shri. The Shri are the storytellers of the story, and they are known as the beings which turn and circle in their box. Very special beings. So there are different beings of power. There are witches, there are vampires who drain people's energy. This exists as well. Witches who have different types of power, some of them coming from lineages that they remember. And in power, there is also power transmission from one being to another. And this also takes the form of different types of lineages. So there are the lineages of the land, for example, the lineage of clay, the lineage of stick, a war lineage, the lineage of leaf, another war lineage. There is the Wara lineage of Ishwara, the war lineage of the land, of the god of war. There are other types of lineages. There are other lineages of the land, of the continent of America. There's the lineage of flowers, the path of flowers, which is practiced by many healers, for example. Nahuatl healers and stuff like that, okay? Path of flowers, path of clay, which is path of creation, and path of the elements, so path of water, which is the path of the stormcaller, or path of fire, which is the path of the burning ember, and path of other different paths, okay? Traditions that are transmitted from master to disciple in the land. And there are different traditions and different cultures and places in the world, okay? And in creation as well, not just in the world, and on other planets. And in parallel dimensions, they have their lineages and paramparas. So there is a parampara system, which is a lineage transmittal system. And even the lineages of the devil and of those lineages and paths of Satan, they also have a parampara transmission lineage. Okay, so all the different lineages have transmissions. The good lineages, the less good lineages, okay, the darker ones. So there's a counterbalance to the forces of the world as they all interact in the world. Okay, so there are many beings of power and they play different games sometimes. One of the games that is very common is energy draining. So setting hooks into things and draining energy from people or draining their abilities, or trying to progress spiritually at the same rate as them. And you even see that used, for example, to extreme levels where people will put bugs, listening devices in practitioners' homes to try to, or watch them, or try to follow them, to try to grow with them, or you by putting mystical hooks within people to try to grow with their energy, you grow your own energy, or try to do things like you have a meal with them, for example, to try to have something within you that connects to them so that you grow with them, or have visions with them, or dreams with them, or bring a union with them. So people try to often, if they see someone who's progressing on the spiritual field, they try to take something from them. There's even a tradition in some lineages when you have a guru, they come and they sniff, trying to sniff some of the prana from the guru into them. Does that sound like a sign of respect, or does that sound like someone who's trying to take something without asking permission from the guru? Right? So there are many different people and practices and things that are done by different beings who are aware of power and energy transfers within the system. And people who have energy, more energy, well, people are going to want that energy if they don't have their own energy. So beings of power, there are energy games that take place. Very simple, you can do something very simple like going to a store, putting a hook on something, someone brings that home, that object, and all of a sudden you can drain from them when they're in their living room from across the world or from a couple blocks away. You can drain their energy through their home, through the walls of their home, if you can connect that way. So these things are done. So beings of power set up their shields, their defenses, and all these different things to different levels of power and ability to basically hold their own, if you want to call it that way, and thrive or not thrive, right? But it's very difficult for a being that has a lot of power not to thrive in the ways that they want to be, right? Some people might have different ideas of what thriving means, right? Some people have different things that they like to do, Some people, for example, might want to be the most rich person on the planet who's got the biggest business in the world. Well, most likely that person's working all the day on that business, or they have someone else who's running it into the ground. So, it depends what you're looking for in your life, right? So beings of power can be found at different levels. Some of them will be very powerful in society, right? In the society traditional roles, and some of them will be unknown in a shed somewhere, and barely connected to society at all, but a very, very, very powerful being. So there are different levels of power. As there are different levels, for example, of witches, okay, different power levels of witches, much more advanced and powerful ones than others, and different categories and specializations as well, right? Same thing for different types of beings of power, as there are different specializations within Shri, right? So Shri is a divine being, right? One of the gods of the story, one of the gods of the Dharma. So for the Shri, the real Shri, not just someone who takes the name, but someone who's actually a Shri, right? So for those Shri, they have their own magic and their own specializations that they practice, and they can also use other types of magic, for example, if they felt like using other types of magic in some cases, if they have those specializations as a Shri, right? So a Shri is a being of magic. Everything within the being, the Shri is a being of magic because it is a divine being, a god, right? So a Shri is known as a god. There are different types of magic, that can be utilized. There's different colors of magic, as there are different colors of blessings as well. So there are beings that can bless, right? That have that kind of power, that can bless because they've reached divine levels. So that's a kind of power that they can use. There's also the power to curse as well, or to fight a war, for example, with power, with magic, or things like that as well. So, when we talk about beings of power, traditionally, when there are conflicts in society, historically, there's usually beings of power on both sides of a conflict. right? So those beings of power might get involved in the conflict and might make a demonstration or two or much more than that as part of that conflict as well. There are concepts, for example, when you have a conflict, such as, for example, with planes, air superiority, right? With planes, there's the same concept of spiritual superiority, which applies to all elements of the battlefield. Okay, and all theaters and commands. Okay, so spiritual superiority applies to all fields because everybody's a spiritual being, and spirituality connects to everything. Okay, there are different types of power, and power can be used in different ways. It can be used in good ways and bad ways, and who's the judge anyways? Right? So the only judge is God. So when you're a being of power, also when you use a demonstration of power, no one is going to know necessarily that you're using your power, because except if we're talking about physical power, where there might be a trace. When we're talking about magical powers, or when we're talking about divine powers, it's very rare that someone can actually trace that. There are some beings that can trace that type of power, that can either sniff the magic, or that can follow the traces of the magic or of the power to its source and origin, or can recognize at the level of divinity, recognize some of the spells or things that were used, and their origin in the stories as well, by recognizing the story. So there are ways to sniff that, but that's rare. When we're talking about a being that can actually track and actually see the utilization of power from beings of power, that's rare. So it's almost like an anonymous way of using power as well, right? So it's an interesting way in that way as well. Except if someone talks about it, you don't really have a proof. We think back about people that use, for example, implements or stuff like that to use power, and you can make up implements too. But realistically, beings of power don't necessarily need implements to do power. The power doesn't come from the implements, it comes from them, and the implement is usually more like a focusing tool that is utilized to focus or ground a specific desire of consequence. So there are different types of power, different types of being of power, and yes, the gods walk the earth in warrior lineage and warrior lineage. The warrior lineage is the gods of the Dharma, the male gods, and the warrior lineage is the female gods of the Dharma. And the lineages take occurrence within the story as the god or the goddess, the mother goddess or the father god come into the story. And establish the new iterations of the warrior lineage within the story. For the warrior, for example, the warrior lineage, you can see the Shakti Peeths, right? In India, for example, that have been built after members of warrior lineage, and different things like that, as they are recognized in the land, and different honor is given to them in the lineage. And those beings, those gods, as they walk the land and move on from the land and keep watching over the land after that and coming back. As creation is growing, okay, more new beings are becoming enlightened, right? Which leads to the growth of the enlightened vibrationary field, where enlightened beings have their symbols that exist on a vibrationary grid, okay, of enlightenment. So when a being becomes enlightened, okay, they move to this grid and enter as an enlightened being, right? Well, this symbolizes the growth of the universe. This is actually the growth of the universe as it is the growth of the enlightenment of the universe, okay? So when the physical universe grows, okay, that is the same process of the enlightenment growth on the vibrationary field of enlightenment. So the growth pushes the grid to grow as the universe grows, right? As the light grows, right? So there are different beings of power, and their power come from different places and different origins, and they have different abilities and things that they can do. Some are gifted in some things, some are gifted in other things. Some have some specializations, other specializations that they develop and start working on, you know. This is a little bit more about the beings of power. So I think we'll call it a video at that, okay? I hope you've enjoyed this video on beings of power and different types of power within the system.